You ready? Let's do it. Hey everyone, this is Lair Torrent. I am a licensed therapist, author of the book The Practice of Love, and the Holistic Therapist on Instagram. I am here with my lovely bride and my partner of 21 happy years, Miss Ashley Torrent. We are taking over the Angry Therapist podcast today, his Single on Purpose podcast. And Ash, why don't you introduce yourself real quick and tell them what you do?
I am a psychospiritual therapist and an intuitive medium. And I also teach classes in spiritual mediumship.
That's right. And so today we've decided to talk about something that is something we've dealt with in our relationship over the course of the last 21 years. We wanted to make sure it was sort of organic and pertained to us, that we could speak to it from a clinical perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because the clinical perspective on any one thing can be great, but it can also not necessarily land for folks who are dealing with it personally. So we wanted to do something that we could speak to both personally and professionally, and that is trauma in your relationship, meaning deep-seated, acute, systemic trauma that comes from perhaps childhood, that comes from even a former relationship that was, again, acute, that was quite impactful, something that one or both partners brings forward, and it plays out within the new relationship. And that's certainly true for us. Is that right, Ash?
Yeah, definitely.
Can you speak a little bit more about that? What are your thoughts on what I just said?
Well, I think it's an important topic because trauma plays out in all areas of our life. And if we're not aware of how it can impact our relationships, then it shows up. It's pretty insidious. I don't think either of us were prepared for how my trauma would show up in our relationship, because I was so dissociated. I didn't really know how traumatized I was. But this is an important topic because even if you're single and you're working on yourselves, and if you're thinking about getting into a relationship at some point, we're going to talk about things to look for if you're engaging with a partner that has trauma, or if you have trauma yourself, that I'm hoping will be helpful. Great. And I think it's a perspective that we don't hear much about. It's a hopeful perspective.
Certainly. And I know that when I did a reel on it on my Instagram channel, and it was one of the more popular ones. People really commented on it, thanked me for speaking to it. This idea that trauma shows up in what might seem like a perfectly good relationship, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're dealing with this thing. And we're going to get into what that thing is. But first, I want to make a couple of qualifiers. And that is that we may use terms like traumatized partner today, and we may use terms like non-traumatized partner. We by no means actually mean that, right? Am I right, Ash? We don't actually mean that. We're concretized in those ideas that there is a non-traumatized part. I think most of us in this world have some level of trauma. Right. But for time's sake, and for the time we have here on the Angry Therapist podcast, we may use those terms. Understand we don't mean them in totality. I also want to talk about trauma and our core conflicts. I think we all bring our shit forward, right? It's what Harville Hendrix said. He said, we are inexplicably drawn to the arms of a romantic partner who will by their very nature recapitulate our childhood trauma, but for a very good reason, so that we might find healing. And I think that's right. And I say in my book that we bring that trauma forward in the form of, am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? These for me are our four core conflicts that we have with us, that we bring with us as human beings. I'll say that again. Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? We are asking these questions often from a very young place. Now, I say that most of us, we all bring some level of that to the table and to our relational table. I think that's right. And that's what I see in my practice, and that's what I've seen primarily in my life. Now, a quote unquote sort of low-level kind of non-traumatized boilerplate person comes to the table in your relationship, and maybe you have one of these. Maybe you have one that dovetails a little bit into two. But if you're a traumatized person, if you've experienced childhood trauma, systemic trauma, trauma that's lasted over the course of time, maybe in an abusive relationship, you're probably going to get not just one, not one that dovetails into two. You're going to get 2, 3, and maybe even 4 of these. And that might look like, I don't know, if a parent was dangerous, if a parent was abusive, you were going to question from a very young place, from a very deep-seated place within you, well, since the people who were supposed to be safe in the world weren't, I'm not safe, therefore I'm not loved. And they did that to me, so I'm not enough, and nor do I matter. What are your thoughts on that, Ash?
I agree. I mean, all those questions, especially for someone who had the kind of trauma I'd had, which started in the womb and continued until I actually left the relationship with my family at 26. I didn't have any of those questions answered in the affirmative. So I was really operating in a deficit until you came along and you began answering them.
Well, I began trying to help you answer them. Can you, yes. I was wondering at this point, you touched into it a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about because we're sort of highlighting your trauma as it showed up in our relationship. That's not to say that I don't have my own. It's just because hers was as acute as it was and kind of showed up first. We've been forced to kind of deal with it first as a couple, you as an individual and us as a couple. That's not to say that I don't have it, because I do. And we're finding that out now, which is lovely.
It's so much fun.
Can you talk it's so good. I love it so much. But can you talk about your trauma and where it came from and kind of how it's been playing out?
Yeah. And I did want to go back to when you talked about traumatized partner versus non-traumatized partner, and you were saying those aren't concretized identities. And that's so true, because what you're going to find in a friendship and a relationship, and that you sometimes trade off in your healing process. And that's part of it. Sometimes one person's healing is at the forefront, and then they're in a higher point or a more resilient place in their life, and the other person's rises. So yes. So today, just for these purposes, we're going to be talking about your experience and my experience of my trauma in the early, and in a lot of our relationship. So I was born to a mother who has borderline personality disorder. And I want to just say that we use these labels because sometimes they are important. I'm careful with labels. I'm careful with diagnosis. But for these purposes, I think it's important to understand that borderline personality disorder, it's on a spectrum, and there's an end with some people displaying tendencies, and then there's an end that's more towards psychosis. And so I was born to a woman who has the tendency towards psychosis. And this increased over time in our relationship, and as I got older. And I think as she got older, it got worse. And so someone with borderline personality disorder can experience violent mood swings, volatility. Basically, how I like to describe it is, what it feels like to me is that from the outside looking at someone like this, like my mother, is that they are an exposed nerve. And that nerve, that is like an open wound that is coming in contact with the world. And the world is constantly rubbing up against that nerve in the wrong way. And it's creating these reactions and feelings and volatility and sadness and anger and fear within the person who has it. Now, a lot of this comes from an abandonment wound early on. Some people might describe someone like my mother, who is stunted at maybe 5 years old. So moving through the world with a 5-year-old abandonment wound, with a 5-year-old emotional intelligence. I'm not saying everyone who has this is like this. This is my experience of my relationship with this person. And so what often happens is, if the person's not able to heal, they create their own reality to protect themselves. So everything that may actually be happening between two people, they can say, like, if I said the sky is blue, she would say it was pink, and then push and push and push until I believed the sky was pink. It comes with a lot of brainwashing, especially if this is
a lot of gaslighting.
It comes with a lot of control, gaslighting, physical, emotional, psychological abuse, sexualization of your child, and a lot of addiction is often seen in this kind of relationship. So this started in the womb. It started the minute I came into the world. Just from the work I've done, my body has, really sent me messages about this, but I was physically, emotionally, and psychologically abused. I was brainwashed for the time I was in relationship to her. I wasn't allowed to, I wasn't allowed to display feelings or opinions or preferences. If I was happy, she would do whatever she could to put that out, to shame me. I wasn't allowed to speak freely. I could get slapped. I could get choked. We would get in fights over things I wore. I remember, just kind of give you an example of the brainwashing. I remember coming down one stairs in high school, and I was wearing like a denim skirt and a t-shirt and flats. And because I wasn't wearing pantyhose, I was a whore. I looked like a whore. And then the next day I put on jeans and a t-shirt and I looked like white trash. So it's like this constant, you can't get it right. And so eventually over time, you just become invisible and silent and dissociated, completely disembodied, because being in your body is not safe.
So could you talk about how that sort of experience, and I know that that's just a thumbnail of what it is you experienced. How did that come forward in your relationship with me? Once you knew at some point that we were going to be long-term and that you were in it. And so when did that finally start showing itself, and how?
Well, what's so interesting is I was even I was in therapy when we met, and I was with a therapist who was rewounding me, and I didn't know it until you pointed it out in a session, which was really eye-opening. But I remember we had one of our very first conversations in the basement of Brother Jimmy's. You were counting out your money. I was this manager.
That was a bartender. You have to qualify that. I was a bartender, and were you waitressing, or were you
I was managing you.
That's right. Oh, that's
right.
right.
You were counting out your money from the night, and I just remember we were having a conversation, and I can't even remember what it was specifically. I think you were asking me about where I was from and things, but the way you listened and the way you spoke to me, I remember having such a visceral experience in my body, as if you saw me, like you wanted to know me, and you saw something so much more. I mean, I've talked about the first time you looked at me when we met, and it was like you saw through to the core of me, and it made me so uncomfortable because I didn't really know what was there. And it was like your eyes reflected back the truth of me, but I didn't even know what the truth of me was. So it was terrifying. Okay. But my point being is, you were really the first to see me. And in the process of you seeing me and getting to know me and taking an interest in me and loving me and being an advocate for me, I came to life. And I don't mean to sound dramatic, but you made what was invisible visible. You allowed me to come into this world and be seen and become more embodied, just because you welcomed me. You welcomed who I was. And that was such a visceral new experience for me.
Now, did that?
So that's not really how. What'd you say?
Yeah, I was going to say, does that help you touch into the work you need to do? Did that help? Did that push the button of your trauma? Because it seemed to me, in my experience, and I think that people who are having a relationship where they're going along in the beginning of a relationship, then all of a sudden, perhaps you become aware, as I did, that this person has, again, deep-seated acute trauma. It really hadn't manifested itself or presented in any particular way, and I think it could surprise people. That I remember, I think, oh wow, I remember you talking about it and thinking, well, she seems okay. I mean, she seems like she's handling it, right? And then but then when we started doing our personal work, you started really digging in. We went to school, and that forced us to dig in to ourselves. It feels like that was the slippery slope, that when you started to really dig in and name it, and I keep saying doing your personal work, that's when we started really seeing the prevalence of the depths of your sadness, the depths of your trauma, the depths of the abuse that you experienced.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think what I realize now is I couldn't go away anymore. I couldn't become invisible. And you and I lived together pretty quickly. Not pretty quickly, but when we lived together, I couldn't hide. And you can't hide. You can't disassociate. Someone is there with you, present with you. And all of a sudden, what you've been moving away from your whole life, the pain or your own existence, all of a sudden you're existing in this body and you're interacting with this person who sees you. And I didn't know who I was. I didn't really know how to be. I mean, I knew that I loved you. I knew how to love you. I knew what I was moving towards. But again, when you're so dissociated, like I used to wake up every morning and feel shame. I don't think I felt that shame until I began landing in my body. And I remember in Helix, we did the core conflicts. And
that was the school we went to.
That school we went to, sorry, the psychospiritual school we went to, we did exercises around core conflicts, and mine was the first, and it was around the hated child. And I remember after that class, when I realized I was the hated child, that first chakra wounding of the belief that I didn't have the right to be here, fear being the demon of that first chakra, I ran out of that room, and I was blown away. And that was the day I landed fully, and I could never disappear again. And then I felt so awkward going forward. I felt so exposed. It was like I couldn't go away anymore. And there I was. And then it began playing out, I think, in different arguments we had. And
let's talk about that.
We began. Sorry.
Let's talk about how it presents within the relationship, like between two people, at least how it presented between us.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe you should start with that, because you probably saw it first.
Well, so I met this sweet, lovely, soft-spoken, the person that everyone's seeing right now, and the people who meet you, they kind of go, huh? And then I got to meet your protector side.
Oh, yeah.
And, we talked a lot in the book about parts and protector parts, and the fact that I said that that a part of us grows finally to learn that learns sort of in the jungle of your upbringing. It grows and is forged in the fires of your trauma. And as I remember that quote from the book, I think to myself, that's really true. That's really true for you, because there was this part of you that I met. And we can also talk about the fact that I feel like you've some level felt safe enough to show me that. But I met a protector part of you that was like, man, like she was not to be trifled with. Little TNT, we used to call you.
Yeah, little TNT. Well, if you think about it, I could not have a fight response. The times I fought back with my mother were really dangerous. So I suppressed that fight response. And I really believe that I knew on some level, my body knew that I was safe enough to fight back with you, but obviously not in the level. But that pent up rage that would come out, if you, said something that was triggering, which everything at that time was triggering, I had so much fear of, was I lovable? Was I safe? Would I be left? I would go into a blackout rage. Like I wouldn't even know what was happening. You would have to repeat things that I'd said, so I would be aware of it. I remember playing out dynamics with you. The fights with my mother were so volatile that I remember sometimes you and I going back and forth and our voices getting raised, and I would just dissociate completely, but I would be in that blackout rage. And sometimes you would say, I don't even recognize the look in your eye right now. Like, you're not here. You're fighting with someone else is basically what you were saying.
Right.
And what was so beautiful about you, and I so appreciated, is that you were really great to call me out in a gentle manner after they were over, but to also set boundaries. Like, we're not doing that. This can't live between us like that.
And I think it's important to note that when we're talking about these wounded children, the traumatized wounded children, the parts that grow, hopefully to protect us, because you needed to protect yourself in that jungle. When they come to play in the relationship, well, love is inherently dangerous, and love will, I'll say your romantic partner can seem like the most dangerous person in the entire world, because you're supposed to be so vulnerable to them. And I felt like there was sort of an acute response to that vulnerability.
Yes.
Coupled with, if I happen to push on any of those sore spots. And I think I could say with some confidence to anyone out there who is like, wow, I think I am in a relationship with someone who is desperately traumatized by whatever, that you're going to run into those. You're going to bump into this. Like you said, they wear their nerves on the outside of their skin. I think to some degree, when you're traumatized that way, you do that as well. And you are destined as a love relationship partner to bump into those wounds as well. And you probably need to have some countermeasures that I wouldn't have had it not been for Helix and us going to school and doing our personal work together.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And so I know for me, mindfulness training was really, really important, being able to take that breath and titrate my nervous system down. But prior to that, to your point, I think I did meet you in that place because I'm a fighter. I am definitely a fiery fighter, and would draw hard boundaries and push back. And so that did, I think, and then we add to the fact that we were two bartenders in New York, and we were drinking probably way too much at the time. Not probably, we were.
No.
That didn't help things. And so that left us in this place of, holy shit. And I remember thinking, like, is this really going to work? How are we going to make this work? Because when I met that side of you, it was intense.
Well, the thing that I look back and I respect so much is that you always required more from me and expected more from me. Not in a, if you don't get it together, I'm leaving kind of way, but in I believe in you kind of way. And one of the things that I think someone could have come along, the wrong person could have come along and seen this wounded bird and wanted to be their hero and swept in and tried to save me. And you didn't do that. You came in and from the beginning, you saw something in me. It was like you saw the potential in me, whether you were conscious of it or not. You had expectations of me that I could do better, that I could heal. You required more from me. You set boundaries in a loving manner. And you taught me to be an advocate for myself. You were always the one that asked me to fight harder for myself. And then you also, I remember one day said, when do I stop paying for what those assholes did to you? It was like, when do I see the constancy of you? And I remember you saying that and thinking, right, how long is this going to take? And that question really sat in me. And I've worked with couples and people who've been in trauma, and they say, mindfulness is too hard. I can't stop my reactions. But I just remember thinking, I have to do better because I love this person. I have to do better, not only for me, because he's showing me something that's so powerful and so helpful for me. And he's showing me constancy and mirroring like my goodness and loving me in this way. But I have to do it for myself and for him. And there's no choice, not to be mindful at that point.
That's right. I want to talk, we talked about sort of the volatility and the anger that can show up between partners when these protective aspects, when we feel so vulnerable and we've experienced trauma and it's not safe for us to feel that way. We've never felt like we're loved. We've never felt like perhaps we mattered enough for someone to really show up. And so we're concretized in that. But let's talk also about how else it shows up, because that wasn't the only color that you showed me for sure. Like, we had our knockdown dragouts for sure where things got heated. But, that was not the only way that this trauma really showed up. And so, I remember, and again, I tell a story about it in the book where I came out and, it wasn't just this time. That story was almost an amalgam of many stories where I would come out and see you just in it and deep, deep sadness. And I think that's another way that it presents. And, if you're a person, probably men, but I don't want to paint with gender strokes, but probably men have a hard time seeing that type of sadness and seeing that depth of emotionality. I think it can be scary. I know there were moments when it was for me. It's hard to understand, and let's bat that one around a little bit.
Yeah, that was really hard. I think when I look back, what was happening is, like I said, I couldn't have any emotions growing up. So I remember having panic attacks on trains, but not knowing I was having panic attacks till years later. I started noticing symptoms and realized I've been having these for all years, but that's how suppressed I had to be, is a panic attack, but not even knowing I'm having a panic attack. So I was pretty emotionless and checked out. So when we got together and we were doing our work, it was like all the things that were there that I hadn't allowed myself to feel. A lot of shame, a lot of sadness, a lot of fear. The world was terrifying to me. I remember walking through the streets of New York and feeling so overwhelmed by the crowds and also afraid people would see me. This sounds so weird, but hopefully it'll make sense, especially to anyone who has this kind of trauma. But I was afraid people would come up to me and shame me for whatever I was wearing, would shame me for just existing. Like, people would call me ugly. I mean, this is it's such distorted thinking. But when you live in a house with someone who's picking you apart on a regular basis, all you're used to is that there must be something wrong with you all the time. So the outside, in New York, there's all these people around, these possibilities of people to say these things to you. So just existing was really hard. I would wake up, I would feel a lot of shame, a lot of darkness. I just thought I was a really bad person. But it was confusing because I wasn't doing bad things. So there was this disjointed, and again, that's the brainwashing, such a disjointed reality between, I'm just making coffee this morning. I'm just trying to wake up and live, but feeling like I don't deserve to live. And I can't even imagine I think back to those times where you'd wake up and see me and I couldn't even hide it. I couldn't suppress it anymore.
Well, that's the famous use your tools story.
Yeah.
Right. Because to fill people in, I covered it in the book where, I was so confused, right? You said you were confused. I too was confused because here I saw this beautiful woman who had terrible body dysmorphia. I saw this vibrant human who in the world, people would just be like, oh my God, she's so great. How did you land her is kind of the prevailing, the narrative that I heard from people.
I knew.
Right. And then, sort of juxtapose that against what I was seeing often at home. And I got up one morning and I found her in our living room, sitting alone, and just sobbing. And it wasn't the first time. And we had been in school, and and Helix was the school that really asked us to dig into our own shit and read and do the work, do our own work. Don't ask a client to walk a path that you won't walk yourself. Well, there she was. Excuse me, it makes me emotional to even think about it now. There she was walking that path. And I said, use your tools. Where are your tools?
I don't know what to do. You said, use your tools, Ash.
Well,
use your tools.
Use your tools. Use your tools. Jesus Christ. And, what I didn't understand was that the trauma precluded you, the compartmentalization precluded you from using your tools.
Yeah. You don't have access to any tools when you're in that part of you. Trauma is such a powerful lens. That's the lens you see the world through. And there's no room for a new narrative until you reinforce those new narratives. But at that point, there were no new narratives.
And it was so heartbreaking to watch. And I was so desperate to try and help you. And this is where I think people find themselves, right? Like you're desperately trying to help this person and you're ham-fisted at best. Yeah. As you see them suffering. And then, there's a suicidal aspect to it that, was frightening. I don't know if you want to speak to any of that.
I got dark. I tried to protect you from a lot of that. Try not to talk too much about it, but I did think about it. And there was one day I actually did consider it. And I really just couldn't imagine you coming home to that. I couldn't do that to you. But the darkness that trauma can take you to that, you're just a worthless piece of shit.
Right.
And that story is bigger than all the other things that are happening in your life, like even bigger than your partner telling you how wonderful you are, or doing work in school.
Right. That's a great point.
I often thought, and I still think about you holding space for me then, how hard it must have been to witness someone that you could see as like such vibrant possibility, but not being able to see it within themselves. And knowing that you, like you said, you couldn't save me from it. I mean, in so many ways, your love for me, I believe, and I don't think this is a far stretch. If you hadn't come along, I don't know that I would have made it. If you and I had not met because of just the type of person you were in the love, I really feel like I wouldn't have made it. And it doesn't mean that other traumatized people won't find their way, but because of who I was at the time and what I was going through, just your constancy and your love for me and your fighting for me and just reminding me that I am good and all that, it brought me to life. And I know I did my own work. I fought for myself. I was in therapy all the time. I'm still in therapy. I would get up every day. I would journal. I would exercise. I would do all the things to keep my head on straight. But your consistency with me was just so helpful.
Well, and that for me was the hardest part, is the quote unquote, non-traumatized partner. Using that word we said we're going to use, that you couldn't see what I could see.
Right.
That you couldn't see the beauty, the vibrance, the just the lovely human being. And I think that's an important thing, right? Because when you're in that PTSD response, in that traumatized response, you see the world through that lens, if I'm right. And so, how trauma works is, and this, but like the brain operates with the traumatized overlay. And so when that happens, you're meeting everyone and everything, including yourself, through that traumatic overlay. And so that becomes the filter. And so now I understand it, that filter had to somehow, and the filter wasn't always there. Sometimes it was there, and often sometimes it wasn't. And that became confusing. And so one of the things I would say to people out there is, it will feel inconsistent. And there will be times when you're like, we're by that. That's a thing of the past. And then something will happen. Right. And I remember that. I remember being like, oh shit. And so this is where I say that, like, trauma can be so inconvenient, and love is inconvenient anyway. And, but to really love you, and I think people who are dealing with this in their lives, to really love that person is to also accept the fact that this is in fact something that they're dealing with. And when I'm working with clients where this is presenting itself either out of the gate, or it somehow pops up, that it's helpful sometimes to think of your partner not as the identified patient. We don't want to do that. We don't want them to become a bucket of symptoms for us to fix, because you can't fix it. But to recognize them as almost as if when we deal with chronically ill folks, like if you have a couple,
you said that, I was like, I felt so seen when you said that, because that's what it feels. PTSD feels like a chronic illness. I don't think we need to think about chronic illness or PTSD as it will never heal or never get better, but it's something you deal with an ongoing basis, and you can have flare-ups, triggers with PTSD, flare-ups with chronic illness. And so I just want to say that when you said that, I just felt so incredibly seen.
Yeah, because it does. It mirror, like, chronic illness does mirror, as you said, PTSD in the relationship. And so if you're a partner of someone who has PTSD and trauma, it's important to look upon them that way. And so, for me, hearing that, I was like, oh, so, that invokes the compassionate lens. That invokes that part of me that goes, okay, so I need to make space for this. It can't define our relationship. And these are the sort of the notes we give to folks with chronic illness in the relationship. It can't define the relationship, but you can't deny it. It has to be, you have to make room for it. There has to be space for it. And if you are going to be partnered with someone with PTSD or chronic illness, you have to make room in your life and in yourself for that fact, because it's a fact. And while often chronic illness, this is a point I want to make, chronic illness can show symptomatically as something that you can see. Maybe they're in pain, maybe there's scarring, maybe there's a surgery or something that goes, there that is. PTSD doesn't do that, right? And so with the folks that I work with, very often it's like, if someone's telling you they're having this feeling, you should fucking believe them.
Yeah.
And that becomes doubly true for someone with trauma and PTSD. And so when you tell me that you're in it, or you're having a day, or you're having you've been triggered by something, I'm quick now, because I've been dealing with it for a while, to make sure that I make room. And the first thing I say is, okay, what do you need? What do you need?
Well, and
sometimes you're like, nothing.
Right. Nothing. But I've learned, I remember times when you were like, there's something always physically wrong with you. And there was a time where my immune system was like not at war, but fighting with the trauma. And I did have cycles of illness, like a virus called Epstein-Barr, that I would feel like I was getting sick every 6 weeks. And, I remember there were just things going on early in our relationship where you were like, you don't feel well a lot. So it was interesting to not only have the emotional aspect, but the physical aspect. And it wasn't until maybe 6 years ago that I realized the toll that the trauma was taking on my body that I hadn't been able to heal. But you were always really good at believing me, but you were really good at reflecting back. Like, do you recognize this is happening a lot? And it didn't feel like in a judgmental way. It felt like we need to look at this way.
Yeah, I was concerned. I was concerned as shit. I remember now that you say that, I kind of blocked that out, that, there was that point. It was like, wow. And I want to say that for the partners in my position, it can feel exhausting. It can feel, again, inconvenient. You might even find yourself becoming annoyed. And if you find yourself feeling that the trauma is inconvenient, that the feelings are too much, and that you're becoming annoyed, I'm sorry, you still have to make space. That's what love would do. You still make space, but that's also a sign that you need to take care of yourself. And I say that knowing that I'm very often not particularly good at that. And I know that you probably commented on that, but it's time to look at your compassion meter. You may be running a little bit low, and that you need to begin to take care of yourself.
Yeah. It's so important when you have compassion fatigue that you say, I can't right now. I need some time for myself, but I'll make time later. I also know that in watching you over the years, as I was doing my own work, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm working out this thing, but you don't have to hold space for that. I've got it. My job is to be as resilient as I can. And I want to say to those people who have trauma, we can become a victim of our trauma. And if someone loves us and caretakes us, it could be easy to fall into them becoming a caretaking role. And I didn't want that for you. I didn't want that for myself. And you always asked more of me. So I want to say, as much as the trauma was inconvenient, I feel like you were always making sure that you set boundaries with things, like we've said. But I've always been fighting for myself. Like, I consider therapy like I would say to you, it's the electric bill. I'm paying the electric bill in my head. It's no question. And I would show up for that. And it's my job also as your partner to keep an eye out for, like, what am I asking of this person? And, what can I take care of myself? And what actually do I need help with? Because it is a lot. I've seen you hold a lot over the years, and thankfully it is getting better and has gotten so much better. But
yeah. And let's also recognize that I've had my shit too. Right. And you've made plenty of space for that. And I think that's another really important point, that for the person who is the quote unquote non-traumatized partner, it's often very good for the traumatized, identified patient person to trade roles with you, right? And become the caretaker. That these roles cannot become concretized. It's a climbing term, but one person can't always be holding the belay rope, the safety rope in the climb, right? You need to switch off from time to time. And that's good for innumerable reasons, not the least of which is it is a reminder to the traumatized person that, oh, that's right, I do have facility. I do have the ability to help someone, including myself. And it's really good for the relationship, for the roles to reverse, and for the person who is the non-traumatized person to be able to sort of fall apart in their arms, and experience being supported too. And I think we've done a good job of that over the years. Yeah. You've done a very good job of that with me. I know.
Oh, I think we have done a great job. We always make space for the other person. Not can you speak to sacrificing of our own well-being.
No, but can you speak can you speak to that idea that it was good to kind of like go, wait a minute, I do have facility here. I do have, I actually need to step up and show up for this person. I can't always be in this sort of traumatized role or whatever, the one who needs fixing.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say when I had kids, that was such a powerful thing, because there was something to get up for and not to be in my own head, taking care of them turned on another light bulb in my brain. And I know that could have gone one or two ways for some people. That traumatized people are often scared of, will they be able to handle the responsibility of children? But it actually, I wanted to feel empowered. And so when you were going through something, it gave my brain a job, not to save you, but to hold space for you. I mean, that's why I love my work. When I became a therapist, one of the most beautiful things was that I could see that other people were suffering, that suffering was so human, that everyone had a story, and that was so healing for me. And it was also, being with a client is such intense focus and presence that it was a form of meditation for my brain. So it empowered me to be present, to be out of my own shit for once. I remember I could be in the darkest space, show up for a client, and be completely present, and it would change everything for me. So you as my partner, when you needed help or you set a boundary or you were going through something, it was just a reminder that I have access to other things inside me. And that was helpful. I don't want to be a victim of this. I have accepted that it's a part of my life, but I don't want it to be the only identity. I want it to just be a part of it. And hopefully someday I can let go of it fully.
Right. And so this might be a good transition into what each person can do, because I'd like to give people like some like really concrete ideas about what they can do if they find themselves in a relationship where one or both of you, and I think we need to speak to that too, if both people are traumatized, but what we can do. And so let's transition into what it is that we as individuals can do. We'll start with you, what you can do, what the person in the traumatized role can do for themselves. And one of the first notes I have is do your friggin' work.
Yeah, you have to get in therapy, find a good therapist, make sure you're not being re-traumatized by your therapist, like I was my first one. Therapy should be a loving, safe space, a place where your therapist mirrors your goodness, that sees you, that is your advocate, that cheers you on when things go well and mirrors back how horrible things were that happened to you, but also models your strength. I made time for myself every morning. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to drill down on that point because we're skipping over that therapy session where I said, "You've got to be kidding. That's what you're going to tell her." I said that to her therapist.
Right.
Because some therapy, this is the earmark of how you know it's a bad trauma therapist. And all the good feelings they could possibly have, they just don't want you to necessarily have the experience that you had. And so they'll say things like, maybe your parents did the best that they could. And that's what this therapist said to her. And she happened to bring me into a session. I don't know why we were so forward thinking at that point, but you were. And you had invited me to the session. I looked at the therapist and I said, that's what you're going to tell her. That. And as we left, I said, I know I shouldn't tell you this, but you need a different therapist. And I think by and large, she probably she really did care for you in her way. I don't think she had malintent. I just don't think she was particularly good at dealing with the level of trauma that you had. And I think she just wanted to kind of find a way for you to not feel how you're currently feeling, which is the goddamn worst fucking thing you could ever do to someone who's feeling the way you're feeling.
Yeah, so she just invalidated me.
She just invalidated. Yeah, we say invalidated, but that's what invalidation does, right? Like it tells you, it doubles down on what was already done to you. It's a gaslighting, essentially, of, oh, here's another place where someone's telling me that I shouldn't feel how I already fucking feel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So therapy, I now have two therapists. 2 years ago, I got an equine assisted therapist. So I have a therapist that works with horses. And then I have my therapist that I've been working with for, like 16, 17 years, who is amazing. I get up every morning. I spend time outside. I have to be in nature as much as possible. That for those of you with trauma, it's good to know that nature, the earth produces alpha waves, which are the state of relaxation, meditation, intuitive states. I actually have an alpha STEM machine, which I put on my ears and it sends alpha waves to my brain. Fear and triggered response are beta waves. So I found myself seeking nature all the time. And when I read this, I understood I was seeking those alpha waves. So, I mean, if it's raining, you'll see me in a raincoat sitting outside, begging Lair to build me a pavilion so I can sit outside in the mornings. But, I have to, my mental health is my priority. It's the things I do. I spend time with horses. I surf. That helps keep me courageous. It helps me.
Yeah, don't forget the surfing.
Remember that I am not just fear, that I am strong and I'm courageous and I can be in the ocean. I need to challenge those narratives that tell me that I'm a victim or what happened to me. I need to challenge them on a daily basis. I need to connect with people. I need to connect with my family. I need to connect with myself. Because those are all those good feelings that I didn't get growing up. And so I create them for myself on a daily basis.
Yeah,
and my work is so connected.
Right. And I watch you deal with huge animals when you're standing in the paddocks with them. It's like, whoa, there's something about that. Like, and I've watched you charge huge waves and, paddle into and out of things that I'm like, God damn it. That's a lot. And so there's something about, is there an integrative piece in those experiences for you can you talk about that? Like what happens for you, like body, mind, soul, when you're dealing with big waves and big animals?
Oh, I think what I've learned is we need those experiences because they do integrate new narratives that we are strong, we are courageous. We're not just a victim, that we can face things and enjoy them. Also, surfing I love because the joy outweighs the risk. What I realized is when I was doing things like going to social events or hanging out with people, and I would wake up the next day and feel shame. I used to not address the shame or confront the shame. So every time I did that, I reinforced that connecting with people made me feel ashamed, and therefore I was bad. So I really became resistant to social connection on many levels, unless they were very safe people, because I was constantly reinforcing that humans meant shame. Now, what I've done, especially over the past year or two, is been really connected to people on a level and making sure I acknowledge what feels good. What are big successes for me? Always with my work with clients, connecting with people, that not all humans are unsafe. And so that's the integrative piece. Every time we don't pay attention to those negative feelings that trauma creates and we just give into them, I think we reinforce the narrative. We reinforce the trauma. We're supposed to feel that way. So when you talk about being with horses, I can be with big animals and connect with them and I'm safe. I can go out into the ocean and I'm safe and I'm courageous and I'm having fun. That's a whole new experience of life.
Yes, it changed everything. And so, what I heard in there is do your work, do more than therapy. You do, read, journal, exercise. You talked about the integrative piece of I can do that. And we've talked about this before, but I want to touch on this, is that victim saturated narrative that can very quickly present itself is that I am traumatized. I am a PTSD sufferer. And I know that in your work with yourself and with your clients, and I do the same with mine, that, we really push the notion that, well, we want to validate and kind of go through and peruse those experiences and those feelings and all of that. You are not a broken person. And we also have to know that we also have to reauthor that. And I think that's probably true. Like what happens with the surfing and the horses is you are essentially reauthoring a new narrative around yourself as a person.
Every time. Mm-hmm. That's why, you laugh at me. You're like, you don't miss a day. I don't, because that just makes me feel like I'm a completely different person. Yeah. Yeah.
And so in all this, and this is, I don't want to steal your line, but this is something you've talked about that I think is pretty profound. You said you have to have a relationship to your trauma.
Yes. And that's how I have a relationship to my trauma.
You have to have a relationship to it. Tell me more about that.
Maybe
you already did.
I can't deny that it's a part of my life. And I also don't have to make it everything. I need to make sure that I have to be one step ahead of it. And that means every day I show up for myself in a way, and I'll feel it. If I can't do the things, I'll start to feel not like I used to, but a little agitated, a little closed in, a little claustrophobic, but nothing like I used to. I don't wake up and feel shame like I used to. But part of that relationship to my trauma is like, I can't lay in bed and ruminate, let my mind take over, things like that. I have to keep myself healthy. Just like a chronically ill person has to eat right, has to exercise, take the right supplements. I have to do everything I can, and I have to eat right and take supplements to be one step ahead of this. And like I said, I do want to reiterate that it's so much better than it was. Like I can feel joy, my capacity for love is so much greater, my capacity for connection, my self-confidence. I actually can be seen. I'm doing a podcast. I've done several this year. That's a miracle compared
Let's talk about the reels. The reels you're doing.
Trying. Yes. I couldn't even see myself on film or camera because I felt monstrous. And the fact that I can look at myself crazy. Now is a miracle. Yeah. I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but it's true.
Yeah, no, it's been remarkable. Like I've seen you doing things like it, no one else would notice because I hear people going, "Oh my God, I saw that reel. That was so cool." And I'm like, you have no idea what it took her to get there.
No. So I have a question for you.
So good. Oh boy.
as the non-traumatized partner, just for this session that we're talking about, has it been worth it?
Has it been worth it?
Yes.
I told you before that sweet hiney of yours makes it all worthwhile. It actually does. It's so good. I love it so much. No, it of course it's been worth it. I think it's taken, look, I often say that some of the things that I hold and cherish closest to my heart are things I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And I'm just saying this is not for the faint of heart, but I do think that it's taken us to a depth with one another that probably, I don't know, maybe wouldn't have happened had we not had this, right? It forced us to, I think it either would force calamity and us to not be together, or it forced us closer together. And I think for us, it forced us closer together and it made us go deeper.
We'd have deep conversations. Difficult conversations very early on.
And I had
in that relationship.
I had to get my head out of my ass and stop saying things like "use your tools."
You didn't do that very often. You were amazing. No, you were amazing. Yeah, but I often think you went through a lot. Yeah, you went through a lot.
Well, and so let's dovetail that into what the quote unquote non-traumatized partner can do. And some tips and pieces we can offer to them. And one of the first ones that really became important for me was to try and understand the trauma and trauma. I think very often, especially in our culture, we like to bypass feelings. We pathologize feelings like sadness, and what we don't understand, we sort of like, well, can't you just be happy? For my clients who experience trauma, their partners often are, kind of flummoxed at how they could be so upset, so sad, so wounded, so hurt by this. Isn't it in the past? Do we have to be defined by our past? And all of those comments. And what really helped me shy away from those very fixy aspects was to really begin to understand what it was you're going through, and to understand that just because you can't see the wound doesn't mean it's not there. Right. Once I got all it takes is a quick Google search, for crying out loud. Let's not be lazy about it, right? If you love somebody, you'll at least read an article. Read 1 or 2 articles on PTSD and trauma, and you're going to be like, holy shit. Yeah. This is real. And if you can't look at your partner and see that those tears and those feelings are actually, those reactions are actually real, then I don't know what to do other than say, read a book, go on YouTube. There's plenty of stuff. There's plenty of information right there. So really understanding trauma and the trauma, the specific trauma that your partner's going through, operating from a place of compassion. Because once you understand something, you can really learn to operate from a place of compassion, understanding your trauma. And I said this to you earlier today. I said, we watched The Godfather 2, or we actually watched The Godfather the other night. And there's a scene in there where Talia Shire gets beaten with a belt. And early in our relationship, I had a hard time understanding why you were like, I can't, when you started to come in real contact with with what happened to you, you're like, I can't watch violence on TV anymore. I have a hard time with violent movies and violent games and all that shit. And I was like, really? It's just a movie. That's how if you've never experienced it.
It's a movie to no one who's experienced it, but to me,
that's exactly right.
It's a lived reality. Yeah.
That's well said. A lived reality. And for me, I was like, it's just a movie. We're sitting here. I'm here. I got my big old arms around you. You're safe as a kitten. And what I didn't realize is this pinging that shit in you and triggering you. And so that's when the other night, when that scene came on, you didn't even know it, but I fast forwarded through it. So you didn't have to see
I'm
it.
So grateful.
And
I'm so grateful.
That's the kind of, operating from compassion, from empathy, from understanding that can help
such a loving
your
act
relationship.
To keep an eye out for those things. Yeah. It's awareness.
Yeah. Not just that, whatever that is for you and your relationship, to be able to sort of attune to your partner and what it is that they've been through, and sort of see the the lay of the land in front and sort of say, I don't want them to have to experience that again.
Yeah.
And what else? You have to know that your shit counts as the non-traumatized partner, that you get to talk about your stuff too. We touched on that a little bit earlier in the segment. And to be able to bring your stuff to your partner is actually really, really good for them too. To recognize that very often love is inconvenient, and it's going to be, it can be difficult to deal with people who are feeling the depths of what it is that they're feeling, but that you also have to practice really good boundaries and know what you're capable of, and be able to have like a conversation. Like you and I have sort of established this understanding that it's okay for me to tap out from time to time and say, primarily because of the work we do, but like, I don't have room in this for me right now. Can we talk about this a little later, or after I have a cup of coffee, or after we sit down and just kind of breathe?
And I think that's just healthy relationshiping to be able to say that.
Relationshiping,
in any kind of relationship.
I like that.
Yeah, that's good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also like to say, it seems sort of evident, but I had to come to the understanding that I was not going to be able to fix you. Mm-hmm. Right. That there wasn't some nugget of profundity that I was going to offer. There wasn't some thing I was going to say, and suddenly this would just go away. That truly my presence and my willingness to be with you through this and to hear you and to listen and to validate your experience, that's all I was really required to do. And I think, that was the piece that was hard for me, because I think and I'm painting with gender strokes here, but men in particular feel like we've got our tool belts on. We're going to try and fix it. And to know that I couldn't fix you, that was hard. I felt like I was sitting on my hands a lot. But then when I gave it a little room, a little lead to kind of like just do less and just listen more and create and hold space, knowing that I don't have to fix you. When I started giving that an opportunity to sort of take root, I started noticing that like you would actually come around faster. We wouldn't get in fights because you're not listening to what I'm saying, Ash. This could really help you, right? Then we got in a few of those. Yeah. And so didn't have to deal with any of that because I wasn't offering my wisdom. But
we learned that saying less is always best.
At least for me.
That should be a t-shirt slogan.
Saying less is always best. Yeah, that's true. No, but I've done this recently where, you've told me before, you're like, look, if I don't have one good cry every day, it's not been a good day. And that really landed on, I was like, okay. So that really normalized your tears. And so periodically I would find her, having a little cry somewhere, usually up in our room, laying on the bed, just taking a moment. And normally that would sort of exacerbate me, or years past, or I would sort of be like, oh, fuck, I got to do something. And what I stopped doing is trying to fix it, stop trying to speak to it. And so sometimes I would just come in, lay down next to you and wrap my arms around you. Wouldn't say anything.
Yeah.
Would just hold you for a little while. And then I'd get up and leave and not say a goddamn word. And then later on that afternoon, I shit you not, like clockwork, you'd come to me and be like, by the way, you were amazing today. And I'm like, I didn't do shit. I didn't do anything. But you were like, you were so
No,
good.
You don't have to do anything. Right. Just presence. And I do want to qualify the cry. When I cry, it means my heart is open. So, I'm processing a lot of client stuff as a medium. I connect to the other side for other people. If I don't integrate or let go of the grief that I've come in contact with, then it shuts me down. So sometimes I cry for myself, and sometimes I'm crying for my clients. I'm just crying for the world because there's a lot of dark shit out there. But I so appreciate that it's, as my kids say, mom's processing. Mom's in process, but it is processing because that's how I feel my heart. Because I remember there were years where I couldn't feel my heart. And so I just feel like it's a gift. And then when I'm in it with myself and you just come in and wrap your arms around me, it also affirms that, I'm going to be okay. It affirms that, you don't need to do anything, that you can just be present with it and it's okay. So,
well, and for me, that's
thank you.
It's so great to kind of take that pressure off myself that I have to do something. And anyway, I think it's probably time to kind of wrap it up. I know we're probably getting towards time. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. Okay. I think we covered everything. I mean, the non-traumatized versus
I think we did. I think we
person.
covered everything, and I'm starting to hear the lawn guys outside. So we're going to ruin our audio if we're not careful. This is Lair Torrent, the holistic therapist on Instagram. I have a book called The Practice of Love, and all of the practices that are in there not only can help you in your relationship, but if you're having a relationship with a partner who is in trauma or that's a piece for you, I think you would agree, Ash, because frankly, you helped me write the book, that all of these aspects are really, really useful for anyone in a relationship, but certainly
and even not in a relationship.
Not in a relationship. Well, we've heard that too. A lot of people talked about that too.
Singles, I think it's great to get to know yourself.
Mm-hmm. And the book's really about showing up in your best version of yourself to your life and whomever and whatever you're relating to. And you can find that wherever finer books are sold. So if you don't have anything else, I'm Lair Torrent, the holistic therapist, and you are?
Ashley Torrent, intuitive medium and psycho-spiritual therapist. Thank you all so much for listening.
You can find us both on Instagram, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Yes.